here's Brody Brazil.
Welcome back to part 3 of a series that I actually joked about making, but now I'm actually here doing this series. These are MLB parks that never got built. Wait, what's the joke behind all of this? I've been saying for a while now that there are so many baseball especially renderings out there that exist, that teams have put together over the years and decades. And yeah, even here in the 2020s, it seems like every season we see 2 or 3 different teams have 2 or 3 different concepts and these beautiful renderings come out. But most of these renderings never actually get built. And so we've got a collection of these. We've got so many renderings over so many years and decades. We should actually put these in an art museum and display them like art because they are beautiful. They are inspiring. They are visually captivating. When I see a lot of these renderings, I'm like, wow, this would be special if you built that. Problem is, it's hard to build all these things. They cost a lot of money. They require approvals. They require people actually doing a lot of things that sometimes never actually happen. Sometimes it's a good thing, like I think in the case of new Fenway Park up here, they were thinking about replacing old Fenway Park. I'm glad that didn't happen. But in the case of Labatt Park in Montreal up there, that would have saved the Expos from moving. Never got built, never happened, so the team moved. This would have been the San Jose A's. Cisco Field in San Jose, I think also in Fremont. But that right there would have saved the A's in Northern California. Instead, it doesn't get built. The team ultimately leaves the Bay Area. So sometimes it's good these didn't get built. Other times it's bad for teams that they didn't get built. By the way, shout out to stadiumpage.com. They do a tremendous job archiving and telling the stories of some of these concepts. They have documentation of all the current stadiums, but it's really fascinating to see these ones that never got built. Let's begin episode 3 here, part 3 of this series, with the Pittsburgh waterfront. Now, I say waterfront. This is actually a stadium for the Pirates on the river in Pittsburgh, on one of the rivers in Pittsburgh. And could you imagine the logistical challenges of not only building this stadium on top of a river, but the approvals you would need, like environmental stuff and just security stuff? Do you really want, maybe we weren't thinking about this in the 50s and 60s. Do you really want boat traffic going under your stadium and your thousands of people there? You have to inspect all this structurally. There is a lot going on. And it wasn't just this stadium. Look at these 2 high-rises. There was a bowling center that was part of this. I know, crazy and random shopping and a mall and parking and all this stuff. We'll get to the details in a second. Could you imagine if this still stood today or if this was ever allowed to happen? It's crazy. It was ambitious. And actually, when I show you the year, it's kind of surprising that even in 1958, this idea came out. Uh-oh, it's time to pronounce Monongahela? Did I say that right? Monongahela River? Man, that's intimidating every time I see that. This was a concept over the Monongahela River in Pittsburgh, a 70,000-seat stadium that also featured, again, if you're thinking, oh, baseball stadium is tough enough, 70,000 seats, first off, featured gardens, parking for 4,000 cars, by the way, restaurants, a 600-room hotel, a 100-lane bowling alley, and the world's largest covered boat dock. It was going to go underneath the stadium. Congrats, you've got the world's largest covered boat dock under your stadium. I've been to Pittsburgh a lot of times. I don't recall a ton of boat traffic. Would people have taken their water crafts to the baseball game? I don't know. I guess the idea would be pretty cool. Park your boat underneath and then take an elevator up. But then would that have covered, how high up on the water? Wouldn't you have had to build that at least 40, 50 feet high for taller vessels? I don't know. Anyway, the idea was eventually, thankfully, replaced by doing Three Rivers Stadium on the north side of the Monongahela River. I just wanted to say it one more time. If I'm getting this wrong, by the way, I'm going to be very upset. Let me know in the comment section below if I got Monongahela River pronounced correctly. So fortunately, they went away from this idea, probably for a lot of different reasons. Oh, look, here's a second variation of this. And maybe this one's a little bit more toned down. Also, I didn't really touch on this, but the scale of the first one. Is the river even that big? Even this one. You're putting a whole baseball stadium on the width of that river right there? Is it wide enough to do that at enough points? But could you imagine the structural integrity of that? I don't know. It's just a lot going on. It would be unique, and there have been some crazy things floated out here over the decades. We'll get to a few more of those in this video later, but this is what they ultimately kind of decided on, more of a north shore of the river type stadium. Turned into Three Rivers. Eventually, Three Rivers was enclosed. It was a circle all the way around, hosted the Pirates and the Steelers for a lot of years, and now it's in the same vicinity of where PNC Park and where the Steelers Stadium is to this very day, on that north shore of the river. Pittsburgh's got a great sports town setup, where downtown is, where the hockey arena is. It's too bad not everything could be all right next to each other, but the baseball and football stadiums are right next to each other. And that Roberto Clemente Bridge connecting basically the sports hub of the baseball and football stadium to downtown, and its color, and all the teams in Pittsburgh shared the same black and yellow, black and yellow. It's just a very cool sports scene in Pittsburgh. But yeah, I'm glad they did not do this right here. I just don't think that would have lasted or went over very well. No sleep till Brooklyn, or the Brooklyn Dome that they were going to build. And look at, like, you can just tell, like, the artist's illustration here and the cars. I mean, is this from the 40s or 50s? Like, this has a very old school look and feel to it. But the idea was super modern. They were going to build this big, ugly dome, but in it, I mean, look, they were going to put stores and shops. They had storage areas. They had a movie theater, like, as part of the stadium. They were just, like, kind of throwing random things in here. Like, we're going to put all these things in this Brooklyn Dome to obviously try and keep the Dodgers in Brooklyn. But again, building domes in New York, we keep going back to, like, the Mets considered a dome for a while. The Yankees thought about putting a dome over Yankee Stadium that was built in 1923. This one's interesting, too, because the streets are like literally right outside. So there's these, like, tunnels for people to get out of the stadium and then walk these stairs down to the streets to a taxi island and buses. And I mean, this just looks like a nightmare right here. An ingress and egress nightmare. And now we're playing on a turf field in Brooklyn. And are those cars inside the stadium? You park actually inside the stadium? There was so many ideas for this place. Logistically, I don't know that it would have all fit. AKA the Dodger Dome, or the Brooklyn Sports Center, if you look this one up on the internet. It was obviously meant to replace Ebbets Field. This was introduced in 1955. I was alive in 95. I was in high school in 95. 1955, it would have cost, I mean, this is crazy, right? It would have cost $6 million in 1955. A whopping $6 million. And actually, this did become Barclays Center, where the Islanders used to play, home of the Brooklyn Nets, very much a concert venue. Actually, maybe it's right across the street from Barclays Center, but basically right in that neighborhood. So a sports venue did get built in Brooklyn here, just not the home of the Dodgers, and so unfortunate that this was one of the reasons maybe why they left. This Brooklyn Dome was pitched and proposed, and it also kind of felt like a long shot the entire time. I mean, if you see me here in 2025 mocking it, even back then they looked at it and said, there's no chance of this even being built. And by the way, this video in this series, it's not necessarily about the politics behind why these renderings didn't get built, more about the presentation and the ideas and eventually what happened and what didn't. But it felt like back then, this idea had no chance, and then it was used as the excuse of, well, we can't get this done, so we're going to move to Los Angeles. We thought the dome was real. We really wanted the dome. And the public's like, that's not possible. And so they said, we're moving to LA in 1957. So as much as we talk about, ooh, good idea, save the Dodgers, maybe there was really no chance of this Brooklyn Dome ever happening. A couple different flavors, by the way, of the dome. Now this feels more like the 50s and 60s. That's just like creepy to look at. It really is. A modern marvel of engineering and architecture and construction. I'm sure at the time they were like, this is revolutionary. But looking at that thing right now, holy smokes. That would have felt outdated by the 70s, if not the 80s and 90s. Here's more of a cutaway look. I mean, look, they actually built the model here of what this was going to be like. It doesn't feel like, I guess there are several decks in this cutaway, but here again, we're pretty obsessed with parking in the actual stadium itself. They really wanted to make sure they fit parking underneath the seats of a stadium. I don't know how that goes. In a modern stadium, you'd never even think twice about that. But this is something they They had the idea for in Brooklyn in two ways. Thankfully, it never got built because I think it would have been replaced and it would have caused more problems than it solved. But unfortunate that it never got built, and unfortunate that the Dodgers moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, and New York lost one of its loved teams. Brooklyn lost one of its loved teams. By the way, did you know the Mets exist because the Dodgers and Giants both left New York? And the Mets have their colors of orange and blue. Orange is from the Giants, blue is from the Dodgers. Did you know that? The Mets are basically the replacement of two teams, and they have those colors because of the two teams that left. Fun fact, it's a bonus. Hey, speaking of the Giants, the San Francisco Giants, they've always been that. But if you're from Northern California, if you're from here in the Bay Area, there is kind of a divide between the East Bay and the peninsula of San Francisco. Can you believe that the Giants, when they came out west, and I can't find a lot of stories or documentation on this. I'm still doing some more work to try and uncover this. I'd never heard this before until this last week of doing research. The Giants almost built a stadium, or they considered doing this in the East Bay community of Hayward. Now, this was about 10 years before the A's had ever even thought about moving from Kansas City to Oakland, and I don't know that the Coliseum was fully approved yet. So you have to understand the time and the context here. This wasn't like the Giants were trying to move in while the A's were there. The A's weren't a thing yet in Oakland. But the Giants actually considered this design in Hayward, California, which is only, 15 or so miles south of the current Coliseum complex that they used to call home. Again, there's almost zero documentation of these renderings. I just came across them on stadiumpage.com. But to try and put together the pieces here, like, when were these renderings? What was the idea? Was this to get them out to California separately from Candlestick? Was this an alternative to Candlestick? In August of 1957, the Giants announced they were moving to San Francisco for the 58th season. Imagine that announcement. Like, the season has a month or two left and we're gone after it. That's a lot to get done in about 6 months to move to San Francisco. Going to San Francisco for the 58th season, the Giants play 58 through 60 at Seals Stadium closer to downtown. That's until Candlestick Park, being constructed, is actually ready. April of 1960, the Giants play their first game at the Stick. And then the 49ers' first game at Candlestick Park, it actually wasn't until October of 1971. Remember, the Giants had Candlestick all to themselves while the 49ers were playing up at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco. So it was all baseball for a long time. It makes me think that the renderings you just saw there were probably from this era right here, a little bit before they announced the move, or maybe even as they were announcing it, somewhere right in here. So a little bit before or a little bit after 1957 is probably when this was pitched, because they just wanted to make certain that the Giants had a place to come out here if for whatever reason Candlestick Park wasn't already in motion or wasn't going to happen specifically for the Giants. And I mean, the reason I know this is Hayward, right, is because I have these two renderings to go by. Here's just a little bit of a different version of it. And I think you can see it. Is that 880 and this is 92? But it literally gives us a map right here. They're calling this the East Shore Freeway. That's 880, right, which connects San Jose up to Oakland and the East Bay. This right here is what we call Highway 92. So this goes towards Hayward and where I grew up, Castro Valley. This is crazy to see Castro Valley and a Giants logo, like right next to each other. The East Bay, when I grew up, was obviously all A's, but the Giants almost landed here at some point, or at least this was considered. I should be fair. I don't want to exaggerate here because I don't know all this, but it seems like this was considered. This is the San Mateo Bridge, so that's how I know this is 92. It's Jackson Street. It says so right there. Here's Hesperian Boulevard. Here's Winton Avenue. So you can kind of understand this is right around the area of where Chabot College sits, Chabot Community College in Hayward. And so this stadium is what the Giants almost did in Hayward. I can't believe that of 44 years of living in the Bay Area, I had yet to hear about this at all. Nobody's ever shared this story with me, and I'm putting together the pieces. Yeah, there's the Hayward Airport. All of this makes sense. I know exactly where this is at. A lot of times I've come over that San Mateo Bridge back to the East Bay and then either north on 880 or stay on 92 to go to Hayward or Castro Valley. All the time. I know exactly where this is at. It's crazy. I never knew this was even under consideration. Okay, back farther away from where I'm from. Let's go out to Philadelphia. They considered doing a dual-purpose stadium, which they eventually did for the Eagles and for the Phillies, but this thing looked a lot different. Like, Veterans Stadium was circular, very round. This was sharp edges. This was more of a U-shaped stadium, and there were two options. They could go no roof, or they could put a roof on it in Philly. Now, maybe these were the initial concepts to eventually get the ball moving on what turned out to be the Vet, but this was the initial idea of how they were going to share baseball and football in Philadelphia. This was proposed in 1965. I got to say, those renderings look more like the 90s. That's pretty good work for 1965. It was going to have a baseball capacity of a little more than 60,000 and 72,599 for football. This was on the site, the planned site, for eventually what would be the Vet, by the way. So they weren't far off. I say that like this didn't happen. It did happen. It just did not look like this. It wasn't square, and there was no dome on the Vet. There was a domed and an outdoor version. They also, and they didn't do this, but it's crazy because here we are in 2025 and everybody talks about a translucent dome roof. They were thinking about doing something that really hadn't been done. They did the Astrodome, right, which was more glass, but they wanted to do a translucent, maybe fabric-style roof on that dome, which would allow the light to come in, more natural light. But if they did it, that alone would have added a year to build, an extra year to build because of that translucent dome. And that's one of the reasons why this project got kicked aside and why they didn't do the dome, why they didn't do that shape of stadium, and why this Philly dual-purpose stadium never actually happened. I gotta say, though, if you can get, of all the things, if you can get a ballpark to have those baseball dimensions and have pretty good, now you're missing here, I feel like a lot of sideline seats. It's kind of weird, but you're still getting all those seats up here. Like this is actually, this rectangle with the squared corners, those are actually pretty good dimensions for a baseball stadium. Not great. Like if you're sitting out here, not a great seat. If you're way out here, not a great seat. For football, it's fine, but it's hard to do the geometry of baseball and football and have the stadium be beneficial for both. But I actually kind of like the way that they tried to do this. Anyway, this never happened in Philadelphia. They went with the round-shaped stadium. Here's a really interesting one. In Chicago, close to downtown, I think steps away from the Chicago River, they were considering at one point, or at least trying to do this, tandem stadiums for the White Sox and Bears. Clearly, you weren't messing with the Cubs. Wrigley Field was their home. But the Bears were thinking about trying to get out of Soldier Field, which eventually got renovated. And, well, here they are again, still trying to get out of Soldier Field after it's been renovated. But they wanted to do two stadiums side by side that shared a similar roof structure. See all these posts, these big pillars, these metal structures here, kind of a truss with like a canopy type design. All those supported one roof system. There was going to be one retractable roof that slid over the football stadium or slid over the baseball stadium if you needed it. You can kind of see it better here. I kid you not, two stadiums side by side sharing a similar track and roof over them. And they actually, I think they considered this also in Kansas City at the Truman Sports Complex. They never got to building it, one for the Chiefs and one for the Royals, or two stadiums, but one roof that would slide and share for two stadiums. This concept was proposed in 1985, again, steps away from the Chicago River, so great location. Downtown would have taken up a ton of land, by the way, to do separate baseball and football stadiums. Sharing that movable roof, how is that going to go? And what happens, like, do you really want the football stadium getting snowed in while the baseball stadium is covered? Like, how do you know what I mean? Why not just cover them both or have them both then be retractable on the same track? Anyway, maybe they thought they were being smart. Maybe this was more for show than for fashion than for function. But they were going to build a baseball capacity stadium of a huge mistake. Would have been 54,000 in 1985. Way too many seats. If that still existed today, they would have cut this thing down to 37,000. 54,000 for baseball. They thought baseball used to be that popular. It's just not the same anymore. Or the ticket prices are too high now. The football capacity of a whopping 78,000. If I'm just doing the math here. In fact, let me do the math here. 8, 12, 7, 13. 132,000 people if you had simultaneous events or a baseball game, a football game in the day and a baseball game at night. That's a lot of people in one little neighborhood or area. Shared concourses, shared structure, shared facility. I guess to some degree, maybe you were cutting down on some costs by putting these together, kind of like under one roof, but sharing one roof. But the logistics of this would have been bonkers. Here's kind of a blueprint, an overhead view. I mean, again, this is not the level of detail on this blueprint isn't tremendous, but I guess some of it does make sense. You could build it all at once. You don't have to double down on transportation or transit. I don't know. I initially thought this is a bad idea. Maybe it's not the worst idea. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a bad idea? If you combined a baseball and football stadium, and really you're never playing at the same time necessarily, or you could probably want to avoid that. You just want to put two things in one place to save and share and maybe get it passed all in once. Where in Chicago, again, it's hard to pass a baseball stadium and then a football stadium. Maybe you put all your eggs in one basket, you do it all at once. Would they have been happy over the years sharing this? How would that roof thing have gone? Again, just pretty crazy that the tandem stadiums were an idea. But it falls into the category of something we can now put on the wall, we can look at and say, that's an MLB park that never got built. There are so many of these. I just did 3 parts of this series. Maybe there's a 4th in me eventually. Or maybe I'll get to some modern ones. Maybe I'll look at the 2010 specifically or the 2020 so far specifically of things that were mentioned and are definitely not getting built. There are so many of these renderings. Appreciate you for being here. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. Thumbs up down there too helps me, the video, and the channel. And don't forget to subscribe right down there. Hit that button. I'd love to see you back here next time.